I'm Dr. Elaine Saunders, Deputy Chair of the Victorian Pearcey Committee, and it's my privilege to be the first to welcome you this afternoon and to be your MC for the 2021 Pearcey Oration and presentation of the Victorian Pearcey Entrepreneur Award. Pearcey Foundation acknowledges the Boonwurrung and Woomera Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation and all of the traditional custodians who belong to the lands where the Pearcey Foundation and you, our guests, are based. We acknowledge all the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders with us today and their elders, past, present and emerging, whose stories, traditions and living cultures in this country are a valuable resource, as are those of us who have come to make Australia our home. Together we're Australia. It's now my pleasure to introduce Mr. Wayne Fitzsimmons, our very hard-working chairman of the Pearcey Foundation.
Thanks very much, Elaine. As chair of the foundation, it's my honour and delight to welcome you all here today. It's pretty unusual and challenging times for us all, particularly if you're in Victoria, New South Wales, because we're still in lockdown. Who would have thought this time last year that would be all online again? So on behalf of the foundation, I'd thank you all for continuing to embrace the online world and for joining us here today. Let's hope it won't be too much long before we're all meeting in person once again. Still, it would be remiss of me if I didn't recognise that it is the pervasive use and availability of the ICT technologies that has enabled our world to continue so effectively throughout lockdowns, school closures and travel bans. The Pearcey Foundation is here to recognise and celebrate the achievements of Australian ICT pioneers and entrepreneurs. I'd like to make special mention tonight of a key member of our audience, Dr. Terry O'Brien. He's with us and is celebrating his 87th birthday today. Happy birthday, Terry. Now, Terry has a special link to the Pearcey Foundation because in 1962, Terry was programming CIRAC, the computer Dr. Pearcey invented. To this day, Terry continues creating new programs, new solutions, and his 60+ years continuous career in computer programming. It may very well be the longest of any person anywhere in the world, a world record. We might hear of that later. From the days when Dr. Pearcey put Australia on the map as the third country in the world to invent a digital computer, to the gift of Wi-Fi from Australia's CSIRO, to all of humanity, and up to the story we will hear tonight about the Australian Tax Office becoming the most digitised revenue agency in the world. It is that spirit of pioneering endeavour and practical achievement that brings us together with the Victorian Digital Innovation Festival for the 6th year. I'd like to make special mention and welcome to Jordan Green, the chairman of our Victorian State Committee for the Pearcey Foundation, and Simon Foster, Pearcey's Foundation Treasurer, who resides in Sydney. Jordan's in Melbourne, I'm in Melbourne, have been instrumental in arranging this afternoon's proceedings. At Pearcey, we succeed as a team, so my welcome is not complete without acknowledging our MC, Victorian Deputy Chair, Elaine Saunders, who you've just had the introduction from, and the dedicated, persistent passion of our Pearcey Foundation Deputy, Kelly Hutchinson. I want to thank all the innovators and entrepreneurs, investors, researchers, advisors, and public servants who join us today. And I say politicians too. We have the Honourable Danny Pearson with us as the essential members of our innovation economy. It is your courage and vision, your willingness to take a risk on creating a better and brighter future that enables and empowers all of us and our families to live in that future. The Digital Innovation Festival aims to grow Victoria's digital economy, to create jobs and to fast-track industry success. The Pearcey Foundation is proud to have been a significant partner in this festival since its inception. This festival is about contributing, collaborating, connecting and celebrating. Special thanks to Kathy Kiltis, and to Kelly Hutchinson for their personal support and support of the Victorian Government to help make this event possible. Our appreciation to Assistant Treasurer and Minister for Creative Industries, the Honourable Danny Pearson, residing in Essendon in Melbourne, for presenting our award. We will soon find out who has been awarded the 2021 Victorian Pearcey Entrepreneur Award, and will then have the pleasure of hearing the oration to be delivered by Jeremy Hirschhorn, ATO Second Commissioner, encouraging us all to imagine the future as he addresses digital transformation, Australia as a world leader. As ever, we hope you find the oration stimulating and challenging, that it helps you find your place in our future, one in which our nation is an integrated, inclusive community with technology as a vital plank for persistent, adaptive resilience and self-reliance in a post-pandemic century. So it is my great pleasure to ask our Victorian Deputy Chair, Dr. Elaine Saunders, Fellow of the Academy of Technological Science and Engineering, to introduce the 2021 Pearcey Entrepreneur of the Year Award. Dr. Saunders was our 2011 Victorian Pearcey Entrepreneur Award recipient for her entrepreneurial efforts in business and in science. Her contribution to developing our ICT industry continues to this day. Elaine has a 30-year history in management of research and technology and in commercialisation and international technology licensing. She has worked in public health systems, university research, teaching environments, technology, commercialisation, and of course, in industry. Dr. Saunders is a widely recognised pioneer, expert and entrepreneur in technology for the hearing impaired. She co-founded several successful high-tech companies and was associated with, amongst many other distinguished roles, the early breakthroughs of the cochlear implant. She has successfully exited 2 hearing technology companies, which she founded and built from scratch in Melbourne to ultimately be acquired by major multinationals. I can think of no better person to introduce our 2021 Victorian Pearcey Entrepreneur of the Year. Over to you, Dr. Elaine Saunders.
Thank you so much, Wayne. Very kind. In addition to the special guests noted by Wayne, I also want to welcome my fellow recipients of the Pearcey Awards from previous years. Thanks to you and to everyone online this afternoon for joining us for this special event and for your support of the Pearcey Foundation. The Pearcey Foundation was started 23 years ago to celebrate support and encourage Australians who engage in and excel at the invention, development and use of information, communication and communication technologies and computing technologies for the betterment of our society. It was inspired by Dr. Trevor Pearcey, who was himself a global pioneer of the digital computing era. The foundation focuses on the people and the dialogue and that drive the ICT sector to stay at the leading edge. Trevor led the design and the construction of the first digital computer in Australia, CIRAC, making Australia the 3rd country in the world to create such a computer. And if you haven't heard the musical demonstrations, go online and find them. The Pearcey Awards recognise those who continue to put Australia at the forefront of technology and development and its application. Peer selection is the hallmark of the Pearcey Awards, to recognise those individuals who've made a significant contribution to the development and the growth of the ICT sector in Australia. Each year, the Foundation awards the Pearcey Medal for Lifetime Achievement. The medalist and up to 2 others are inducted into the Pearcey Hall of Fame to recognise their very significant lifetime contribution to Australian ICT. Those awards, together with the National Pearcey Entrepreneur Award, will be made later this year in Hobart. Today, we celebrate 23 years of this Victorian Pearcey Entrepreneur Award, which recognises an individual or team who's taken a risk, made a difference, and is an inspiration to the Australian ICT community. It's judged by a committee of past award recipients, This is the community that recognises the significant achievements of its peers, those who are in the midst of their career and are leading the Australian ICT sector from the front edge of the global stage. This year, the Victorian Pearcey Entrepreneur Award goes to a woman who has led a diverse career. She started out on a dairy farm southwest of Perth, completed a Bachelor of Commerce at the University of Western Australia, and from there her passion evolved to capital markets and commercialisation, combined with a deep focus on health. A leadership position guided the health innovation community in New Zealand, impressed on her the value and the importance of technology convergence in a diverse and collaborative business culture. Her focus on digital health in all its facets, diagnosis, medicine, therapeutics and management, was the deep expertise that caught the attention of a specialist international biosciences fund manager based in Melbourne. And for 6 years, she focused on venture capital investments across Australasia. During that time, she gained experience in governance and executive roles. She even found time to co-found a startup in pet care, a sort of Airbnb for pets. Along the way, she gained additional formal qualifications in commercialisation and a master's degree in commercial law. Choosing the recipient for the award is guided by 3 principles. Has the individual taken a risk? Is this individual making a difference? And is this individual an inspiration to others? Our recipient tonight has taken more than a few risks in her life to pursue her passions and her career. Each of her major career transitions happened when she left her current job without knowing what would come next. In 2017, working with a consortium of industry partners, she created the only commercialisation organisation in Australia that's dedicated to digital health, with a specific focus on digital medicine and digital therapeutics. The novel non-profit model is specifically designed to suit the Australian reality. It's already supported over 450 emerging digital health companies, with 10 companies selected in the 2018-19 pilot program going on to raise over $70 million in funding, creating around 300 jobs and impacting over 200,000 patients. This in just 4 years. This original cooperative commercialisation model, designed specifically for Australia, has led to a significant growth of our nascent digital health sector. In some ways a difficult sector. Her original model and her reputation for well-placed, tough love continue to be a driving force for the development of our sovereign capability in evidence-based, regulated digital health technologies. She's always been generous with her time, sharing her insights and experiences in industry, teaching academic and policy forum. She participates in the Australian New Zealand Leadership Forum for Health Technologies sector group. She's on the Swinburne Innovation Precinct Advisory Board, and she participates as part of the RMIT University Health and Biomedical Forum, or Expert Research Advisory Group. I'm sorry, I'm reading, I had to turn the page. And is a non-executive director of point of care diagnostics technology company, Lumos Diagnostics. In 2020, she was awarded the Most Valuable Woman in Leadership Award by the BioMelbourne Network. And I can comment that that's fiercely, tightly judged forum as well. All of those and more mean that this year's recipient has most definitely taken a risk, made a difference, and is a true inspiration. Ladies and gentlemen, to present the 2021 Pearcey Entrepreneur of the Year Award, I am very thrilled to welcome Victorian Government Assistant Treasurer, Minister for Government Services, Regulatory Reform and Creative Industries, the Honourable Danny Pearson.
Well, thank you, Elaine. And firstly, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the various lands on which we are meeting, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. and the Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be joining us today. Thank you so very much for this wonderful opportunity to present the Pearcey Victorian Entrepreneur of the Year Award. It's great to be here with you all, and as Minister for Government Services, I'm so very proud to support this event that celebrates our digital transformation and the very important innovators who are leading the way, the true pathfinders of our economy. The past 18 months have shown us how much we rely upon technology. Digital transformation and innovation have never been more important and are crucial to our success going forward. I'm incredibly fortunate to have the opportunity to shape the Victorian Government's digital transformation agenda through Digital Victoria and to connect with digital innovators like you from right across the state. It is my absolute honour to announce the 2021 Victorian Pearcey Entrepreneur of the Year is Bronwyn LeGrice. Congratulations, Bronwyn. Now, this award recognises outstanding individuals in the tech space who are innovating and making a positive difference in their community. And Bronwyn's story is a brilliant example of the digital innovation and fresh ideas that are being generated right across the state. Bronwyn founded And Health in 2017, which is Australia's only dedicated health accelerator and commercialisation support organisation. And Health is the only female-founded, managed and majority female-governed accelerator in Australia, and the organisation is a strong advocate for gender diversity in science, technology and finance. Bronwyn has guided And Health to become Australia's leading health technology accelerator. It supports Australian digital health companies to navigate the commercialisation pathway from ideation to institutional investment and entry into international markets. On behalf of the Victorian Government, Bronwyn, I offer you my heartfelt congratulations. This is such a fitting tribute to your vision, your leadership, and the great role you're playing in leading us to a richer, a better future. So, with those few notes, Bronwyn, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Minister, and thank you so much for being here with us tonight. Minister Pearson, Mr. Jeremy Hirschhorn, Mr. Wayne Fitzsimmons, Mr. Jordan Green and Dr. Elaine Saunders from the Pearcey Victorian Committee, Pearcey Foundation members, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for being here virtually this evening. Before I begin, I would like to take the opportunity to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the lands from which we all join this virtual event this evening. For me, in the southern part of the Macedon Ranges, it is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and future, as well as those of other Indigenous peoples here with us tonight. I'm truly humbled to have received this award. There are very few genuinely peer-based award programs in Australia, and it is such a privilege to be counted among the extraordinary recipients that have previously received the Pearcey Foundation Victorian Entrepreneur Award. Tonight's celebration feels a lifetime away from my childhood on a dairy farm in the southwest of Western Australia, and that's not because of WA's COVID border rules. But my childhood, light years away from digital health, was a real driver of who I've become. My late father was a farmer who embraced innovation and fiercely believed that there was always a better way of doing things. He never let the fact that it may never have been done before deter him. And my mum, dialing in from WA tonight, on the other hand, was the one that had to make sure that all of that innovation didn't break the business. So needless to say, this apple didn't fall far from the tree, but I will leave it to you to decide which tree. At university, I pursued business as it seemed to be a path with the most flexibility and capability to have an impact on any number of sectors, which is a long way of saying I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I can't say I thought that digital health would have been in the plan, but as a person coming to technology now from a business and law background, commercialisation of health technology is one of the most fascinating and complicated sectors in which one can operate. As a non-technologist in technology, I've long been passionate about the role that technology can play in shaping our world, both for our generation and that of our children. and in the role that business skills play in bringing technology to the consumer. In my current field of evidence-based digital health, we see technology go beyond enabling data collection and practice management to tools which directly interact with patients to change health outcomes. Applications which drive reductions in key biomarkers for people with type 2 diabetes, those which reduce hospitalizations for those suffering chronic respiratory disease, and technology which dramatically improves the chances of successful IVF cycles. These are all examples of clinically validated technology-based interventions which save and improve the lives of patients all around the world. In 2015, raising capital for a connected health company in the US and the UK, it became clear that in those major markets, they were talking about digital medicine and digital therapeutics. And in Australia, we were really talking about the digitisation of medical records, my health record, health IT infrastructure. And my frustration was that that limited view of the role technology plays means that we really needed to disrupt the way we thought about healthcare, not as about how technology enables just the healthcare system, but how it enables health. And so with the help of James Dromey at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute and the support of a significant number of industry partners and Industry Growth Centre MTP Connect, And Health was born. And I have to say, And Health has operated with the support of those partners since inception, and we could not do it without them. But it was designed from the ground up to be a disruptor, which for those that have met me won't surprise any of you. It was meant to disrupt the working definition of digital health in Australia, but also the prevailing accelerator approach at the time. It's always sought to lead by example and through real world experience. As many of you here tonight will know, there is really no replacement for the experience and the scars of having been there and done that. And I know Elaine will definitely resonate with that because I'm fortunate to have had many conversations with her on her journey. But fortunately, our great experiment worked. Our pilot And Health Plus program, which recently received almost $20 million of investment from the Medical Research Future Fund, in its pilot supported 10 SMEs, which have gone on to create 300 jobs, raise over $70 million, and impact, most importantly, over 200,000 patient lives in less than 4 years. If we bring that back to the Pearcey Foundation, And Health is truly committed to elevating Australian innovation. We believe our innovators can create global digital health businesses from right here in Australia. And we are dedicated to supporting both those innovators and also to removing the systemic barriers to commercialisation which they face. Because it is only through commercialisation that we can actually impact the lives of patients, clinicians, caregivers, and their families. As we sit here tonight, robbed of the opportunity to gather and socialise over a fine wine and a gala dinner meal, at no time in my career has resilience been more important. The resilience of businesses, of our people, and of our relationships. But with resilience comes opportunity. As we look to a path out of pandemic response, Australia has a clear national need to grow internationally competitive, export-focused, resilient industries that will underpin our economy into the future. And we're hopeful that And Health will play a pivotal role in ensuring that digital health is a part of that. I'm deeply grateful to the Pearcey Foundation for their recognition. And I also thank the many, many people, and there's too many to name, who've both supported And Health and myself, personally and professionally, so that I can be here tonight. And I thank you again.
That was really, really great. I now want to a really nice introduction to yourself, Bronwyn, and I think you'll be a fantastic addition to the Pearcey community. It's now my pleasure to pass on the baton to Jordan Green, who is going to introduce Jordan, Chairman of the Victorian Foundation, who will introduce our orator for the evening. Over to you, Jordan.
Thank you very much, Elaine. So congratulations, Bronwyn, once again, a great exemplar of the passion and success we need and have in the technology community here in Victoria. Ladies and gentlemen, now we turn to the 2021 Pearcey Oration. Each year, the Pearcey Oration is presented by an eminent expert reflecting on critical contemporary issues impacting on our nation that arise from the introduction and adoption of new and advanced technologies into our society. For the last few years, digital transformation has been the hot topic. Buzzwords to earn consultants big fees and challenge management and boards to fully appreciate the impact of the shift to a fully digital world. When the internet first arrived late last century, Australian governments were amongst the first in the world to start moving public services online. In the last 20 years, we have evolved into a world that was previously only envisaged in science fiction. Advanced economies have almost ubiquitous internet access, and even emerging economies are surging ahead with the benefits of wireless technologies. Wireless payment systems are already commonplace in Africa, and that was long before we got credit cards on our own smartphones and smartwatches. Online shopping is now enjoyed by billions of consumers around the world, and often without any conscious reference to the geographic location of the goods or the vendor. Keeping track of all of this online commerce, financial transactions, sales of goods and services is essential to maintain standards of conduct, human rights, fair trade, and our safety through regulatory compliance. Even if the policymakers are able to keep up with the challenge, we need the systems to implement these policies. Systems that are dynamic, adaptable, and adaptive to meet the rapidly evolving marketplace, ever-changing business models, and predatory practices of some of the less ethical corporations and governments. The news has been full of failed efforts at digital transformation undertaken by large organisations, banks, retailers, manufacturers, and governments. Some have suggested that the only path to success is to create from the ground up an entirely new born digital organisation. We've seen a swag of new digital banks try that path, and many have failed. A startup is not always the best way to answer innovation of a complex system. Government revenue is called tax. That is how we fund all the services we expect and require from government. The big consumer tech companies are all under fire for tax minimisation, manipulating their operations to avoid paying tax wherever they can, including in the countries where they were born. That is all quite understandable, yet it can be seen as cheating economies like Australia out of our fair share of that tax. Getting this portion of the money spent by Australians that should be going to fund our government services rather than swelling the coffers of private companies overseas. Digital transformation of government services is not just about technology. It is not just about one jurisdiction, and it is not just about tax and regulation. It is about having the systems in place across government to rapidly and effectively respond and adapt to the shifting needs of the community for the greater benefit of all citizens. What an incredible challenge that must be. Today, we are privileged to welcome the ATO Second Commissioner, Jeremy Hirschhorn, to deliver the 2021 Pearcey Oration. Jeremy was appointed to the Second Commissioner role on the 16th of April last year. He has overall responsibility to the ATO Client Engagement Group, which fosters willing participation in the Australian tax and superannuation systems through well-designed client experiences. Jeremy has more than 20 years' experience in roles managing complex tax matters. As Deputy Commissioner of Public Groups and International since April 2015, Jeremy has been responsible for ensuring that the largest Australian and multinational companies were meeting their corporate tax obligations and providing the Australian community with confidence that these large companies were being held to account. When he joined the ATO in August 2014, Jeremy worked as Chief Tax Counsel with responsibility for the provision of ATO legal advice in relation to interpretation of the tax and superannuation laws. Prior to joining the ATO, Jeremy was a senior partner in the tax practice at KPMG, where he had worked for nearly 20 years. Jeremy holds a Bachelor of Commerce and a Bachelor of Laws from the University of New South Wales. He's a chartered tax advisor and a chartered accountant. Today, Jeremy will encourage us all to imagine the future as he addresses digital transformation, Australia as a world leader. So without any further ado, please join me in welcoming ATO Second Commissioner, Jeremy Hirschhorn. Jeremy, we are in your hands.
Thank you very much, Jordan, for that very kind introduction, and thank you very much, everybody, for your time this evening. It is a great honour to have been invited to deliver this year's Pearcey Oration, and hopefully providing some insights into how technology and data are increasingly driving improvements to Australia's tax system and how Australia is a world leader in that. And hopefully from our experience, there are some perspectives which are useful to this audience. As Jordan said, my role as Second Commissioner Client Engagement Group is to foster willing participation in the tax and super systems through well-designed client experiences. Now, let's unpick the corporate jargon a little. So willing participation, what does that mean? It really recognises that the Australian taxation system is world-leading, not because of great auditors, although we have world-leading auditors, but because the vast majority of Australians are honest and see the value of their contribution to Australia. In one sense, you could say the taxation system is a set of rules for sharing, so that we can we share the load of Australia being the country we want it to be. But that said, in seeing the value of their contribution to Australia, Australians are not always exuberant about paying tax, which leads to the next point, which is around well-designed client experiences. Now, as well as a little bit euphemistically, my role including responsibility for the audit functions of the tax office, well-designed client experiences reflects that Australians who want to make their contribution should have as simple and as painless an experience as possible. And so we should not make it difficult for them to comply or leave tempting traps where we can help people avoid them. On the other hand, and as touched on by Jordan, Australians should also have confidence that others in the system are robustly held to account, because this reinforces their participation in a sense that they don't feel that they're the suckers in the game. We sometimes sum this up in the phrase, easy to comply, but hard not to. So to achieve these goals, even though Australia is a relatively small country, the ATO must be very interested in digitisation and data. And tonight I hope to give you some insights as to how we have approached the challenges and opportunities in our core business of collecting tax, but how we responded over the last 18 months to the COVID pandemic, and some thinking as to what is next and how we see the system evolve. In doing this, I've split my presentation into several themes. So 5 main themes. Instead of thinking about a tax return, thinking about a data set and how do you get a clean data set. Insights from our COVID response and how that and how you develop something from scratch very quickly. The ethical use of data, which is so important and often, I think, forgotten. How data and digitisation is driving the future of tax administration, and ultimately playing our part in the whole of government approach to data and digitisation. But before I begin and get into those 5 themes, I thought it might be worth doing some introductory observations on the Australian tax system and the ATO's role. So underpinning all of this is a set of various acts of Parliament, and the ATO must administer the law, the systems in accordance with those laws. One way of thinking about this is that these laws are actually complex algorithms running inside some sort of ATO tax system computer, where you theoretically input a factual scenario and now pops the answer as to how much tax you owe and how you must pay it. Now, these algorithms have been built on over time, with new modules added, patches and fixes to old modules applied, different programming languages or drafting styles used. For income tax, and we had this great attempt to rebuild the tax system from the ground up in 1997 into a new programming language. but unfortunately ran out of steam halfway through. And so now we have both the old algorithm and the new algorithm operating in parallel. The nature of the political process is also that there is limited opportunity for testing new code prior to going into production, and even more limited ability to patch the code after defects are identified. So although not being an IT professional, I know a lot about managing buggy legacy code. So given that we're sitting on the top of all this code, really it is law, we can't change it. Really, a large part of the ATO's goal is to optimize the user interface and hide a lot of that complexity, the unnecessary complexity from users. Because fundamentally, the Australian tax system relies on users engaging with the ATO, willing participation, as I touched on before. But I thought it'd be worth putting some numbers to this and how it underpins our strategies, because this really dispels the myth that the ATO is primarily about catching people after the event. So one great use of data and analytics capability, and I'll touch on this in more detail later, is that it allows us to put serious effort into quantifying the health of the tax system, both at lodgement and after our compliance activity. And we call this concept tax performance, or it's perhaps more glass half empty alternative, tax gap. Now, our estimates are that across the board, tax compliance in Australia after ATO compliance activities is at about 93%. So that is that we collect 93% of the tax that is theoretically payable according to law. This compares very favourably with the very few other countries which have the capability and confidence to measure and publish this information. And to give a sense check, the Commissioner of the IRS, the US Revenue Authority, recently suggested that the tax performance of the US was below 80%. So there's a big difference between 80 and 93. But then, importantly, of the 93, and depending on how you cut it, about 90 or 91%, or about 400, a bit over 400 billion, comes in voluntarily. And the ATO compliance activities being the 2 or 3% difference. So about, depending on, again, how you cut it, about $15 billion a year. So that's not insignificant. $15 billion pays for a lot of schools. You can quickly see that's critical to protect and grow the 90% if you want to maintain or improve the 93%. A small improvement in the 90% will have as much effect as doubling the results of the compliance work. And so that really drives us to interventions which result in sustained future compliance by taxpayers, rather than catching people out. So we do think seriously about digitisation and data usage in the context of our compliance work, but in most cases, our highest and best use of digitisation and data is in growing voluntary compliance, the 90%. And really, it's something that Bronwyn said, and congratulations, Bronwyn, which resonated with me, was when a lot of this stuff first came in, our thought was, how can we use it to improve our compliance activities? Similarly, I suppose you're saying that this information, how do we improve the health system? We're now moving to how do we improve health? So going up a level. So we've made significant investments in this strategy to make our user interfaces, particularly our technological user interfaces, easier, better, easier to use. So we're now almost wholly digital. So to give a sense, about 1.5% of individual tax returns were lodged on paper last year. The rest were truly digitally lodged. And Australians do expect our online services to be available around the clock, as well as being easy to use and intuitive. And I hope that many of the people on this call have tried the ATO app and used that together with their MyGov and MyGov ID to access their tax services. If not, if you use an agent, your tax agent will be doing that. So we're very committed to providing that contemporary, reliable and secure digital experience for all our users. And that ranges from those who use us multiple times a day to those who interact with us once a year. We do, of course, as a government service, have to provide access to those who cannot interact with us digitally. So while tonight I won't talk about the intricate details of IT and systems, what I will try to talk about is the practical implication of using technology and data to drive compliance and a better performing tax system with less strain on Australians. So the first theme, the tax return as a data set and cleansing that data. So the tax system predates the ability to obtain data at any scale. And so that its underpinning was the tax return, which was really a bespoke data set that we asked each Australian to manually produce each year. The accuracy of the data set relied upon the honesty of Australians, backstopped by significant penalties and the threat of audit. And you can think of audit as a bespoke and very time-intensive one-on-one data verification exercise. Of course, it was very difficult to verify the information provided in those returns against other data points, even on a one-on-one basis, let alone at scale, because the data was in the possession of the taxpayers. The next phase of tax administration around the world developed as third-party verifiable data became available at scale. And this started to allow data matching and a way of informing audit programs. But really the phase that we are in, and many of the leading authorities are in, is in progressing to pushing data to taxpayers. So if we're getting data from third-party sources, let's give it to the taxpayers, save them time and minimise the risk of inadvertent errors that get them into trouble. So we sometimes think about data and data quality on a bit of a spectrum. So the first level is taxpayer provided data that we can't really check. And, so it's like there's still features of that in the Australian system. If you think about substantiation of business work-related expenses, we still rely on pieces of paper, potentially in the form of receipts. Level 2 is where we can source data, but after the event to check that data, but maybe not at scale. Level 3 is where the data can be sourced to be used as a risk indicator, but is not of a quality or type that would be productive for exposure to taxpayers. And that might be because it's confusing to provide it, it's incomplete, it's confusing, or indeed it might be information which facilitates further avoidance or evasion. But where the interesting levels happen is the next 3. Level 4 is where the data is high enough quality that it can be used to assist taxpayers comply. So that's pre-fill. I'll touch on that. So that's where we can help basically provide some information to taxpayers, but maybe not the full picture. Level 5 is where it's very high quality and can be used to pre-fill returns as presumptively correct. And the ultimate level, level 6, is where the data is so reliable that the tax system can be designed around the data. And increasingly, we see this, that this is the future of tax. So to move the system to the verifiable data rather than always try to bring data to the system. And we look across this six attributes, identity, and this identity matching is a big challenge. And indeed, part of the social compact is that government should not have a single identifier for individuals, and that does make our job harder for a lot of this work. But we also look at things like timeliness. When can we get the data to people? Can we get it before they lodge their tax return or only afterwards? Standardisation, reliability. Obviously, the more reliable the data set, the more we can push that data. Visibility and usefulness. And I will touch more on usefulness because this is an important, under ethics, because this is, I think the temptation for a revenue authority is to hoover up as much data as possible and work out what to do with it later. Usefulness is a very important piece of framework. So all of this is aimed at making the accurate completion or affirmation of the data set easier for Australians. And we're now at the stage that for the average individual, about 90% of the boxes in a paper sense that need to be completed on an individual tax return are pre-filled. So they're level 5 or above. This, of course, saves significant time in completing obligations, whether you complete your return yourself or via an agent. What we find in practice is that the average individual now with simple affairs is finishing their tax return in about 15 minutes over their phone. And it's interesting, a member of my staff said, geez, Jeremy, you wouldn't have thought about that at the start of your career, filling in a tax return on your mobile phone, and felt very old when I had to advise my staff member that when I got into tax, there were no mobile phones. So look, to make this a bit more real, so we know we get a lot of data from various cryptocurrency exchanges. And so we know generally who holds cryptocurrency and a bit about their trading. But the nature of capital gains is that we probably don't have enough data or high enough quality data to calculate the capital gains. That would be a level 5. But we do have enough information to inform taxpayers that we're aware of the fact that they have cryptocurrency and that they need to be included in their tax return. And so when somebody is in our tax return system, we will remind them that just remember, you've got to return gains on cryptocurrencies. A traditional Revenue Authority strategy would have been to sit back and wait, have the return lodged, and only then, when people miss out, select them for the joys of an audit. Another example, which is a bit more sophisticated, is that we do population level analysis, and we've got a very good feel for how much of different sorts of deductions people in particular occupations and locations will have. So we call this our nearest neighbour data. So originally, when we started down this path, we used it as a risk tool to select the taxpayers for audit. But we've now moved to the next level, which is when somebody is in our systems preparing their tax return and they put in claims which are out of the ordinary for their pattern. They may well, of course, be correct, but they're out of pattern. We will give them a nudge, let them know that they are different from their peers and that they might want to reconsider their claim. And to give a size of how big this is, in the 2020 tax time, we nudged about 350,000 taxpayers to give them the opportunity to check their figures. Can I say the behavioural response itself was interesting? About a third immediately changed their deductions, a third soldiered on, and a third tried to game our risk engine by progressively reducing the claim to see when they would get below our risk engine. The record holder being 17 times amended, at the same time as increasing another deduction field. They were surprised when they were selected for audit. But there is an element here where we are getting towards the limit under current policy settings as to what we can do for individuals. The last pieces that are left are around deductions. Some, particularly work-related expense deductions for individuals. Some countries, and there has been some political discussion here, but it is ultimately a complex policy call, have moved to a system of partial or total standard deductions to really move to level 6 and make the tax return almost completely pre-fillable. So I might now move on to our second theme, our response to COVID. And really this brought home how important, in a sense, systems, having good systems and data use in place for one purpose is very handy when the unexpected comes along. So in March last year, very rapidly, the ATO was entrusted to deliver some of the government's key economic stimulus measures. JobKeeper, which was ultimately about $89 billion. Cash flow boost, which was, it's often forgotten, but was a very large stimulus measure in its own right for small business, which was about $36 billion. We also facilitated the early release of super, which was about another $38 billion. Now, paying out money is not something that people traditionally think of as the ATO's core business. And I must admit, there was a few moments when it was a little bit psychologically challenging as a tax collector. But can I say, we are very proud, I and the rest of the ATO executive, of the efforts of our people in the successful delivery of these measures, which really kept the economic side of the pandemic crisis, Australia in a very good place. So we had to stand up those systems from scratch to deal with ultimately a bit over 1 million JobKeeper recipients, and which supported about 3.8 million jobs and 800,000 small businesses receiving cash flow boost, and about 3 million Australians accessed their super early. Now, we had to do that with high program integrity and all within weeks. So I think it was about 6 weeks from the announcement of JobKeeper to the first payments. So this required a lot more than dedicated people. So I think a big change here was that in fine-tuning the policy initiatives, the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet and Treasury worked very closely with the ATO to understand the data holdings and the digital systems we already had in place, and designed the policy programs around the data and the systems, rather than designing a beautiful policy outcome and then trying to work out how you implemented it. So there's some pretty key data sets here, which were very valuable, and really, I'd have to say, almost federal infrastructure. The first was the Australian business number for businesses, tax file numbers for employees, the previously lodged income tax returns and activity statements, and single touch payroll, an initiative which really came into its own over the course of the pandemic. So the policy could be designed around these data sets to ensure that it was almost impossible to access the programs unless the business was a pre-existing true business with true employees and a track record of engagement with the tax system. And it also meant that it was easy to link the measures to our data and analytics risk engines. The other aspect, though, was to digitise the experience to make it as easy as possible for claims to be made. You know, obviously in processing what would have been in the end about 5 million forms, that has to be digitised, not in any way manual. So we actually designed Cash Flow Boost in a way that there were actually no new obligations put on taxpayers. So a business simply had to lodge their normal business activity statement or instalment activity statement, and our systems would automatically generate the Cash Flow Boost credit from the data already contained in that existing data set. JobKeeper was a bit more complex because it had to be linked to employees and continued employment. But even there, it was fully digitised with no manual processing. The JobKeeper claim process was designed around the existing MyGov ID, a way of accessing and proving who you are who you say you are, and also single touch payroll systems to the maximum extent. And here, a special call out to the digital service providers who rapidly upgraded their STP systems to allow employers to simply tick boxes in their software, and that software automatically linked into the claiming process in our systems. So what that meant was that about 97%, or a bit more than 97% of JobKeeper claims were received by businesses within 4 days of the claim being lodged in our systems. Of course, the goal wasn't just about paying out money quickly. We had to ensure it had high integrity and provide the community with confidence that tax dollars were only going to those who are eligible. And I would just say here, some of the recent discussion around JobKeeper is actually not about eligibility. It's about whether, with hindsight, a particular business was deserving. Eligibility was rock solid. And so to give a sense, through our systems, we prevented about 70,000 applications for JobKeeper from ineligible entities, and were able to review more than 100,000 entities to a value of about $12 billion. So a bit more than 10% of the scheme. and ultimately determined that there was about 35,000 entities which are ineligible, stopping over, well, both clawing back payments we had made, but stopping future payments of a bit over $1 billion. Now, $1 billion is a lot of money, but in the context of a scheme of $89 billion, that is a very effective scheme. The third theme that I'll touch on is the ethical use of data. And obviously, data holdings and capabilities are only possible because of, I suppose, movements in the technological frontier. You can't hold much data if you don't have strong tech. And I, again, reminded my staff member that my first computer had all of 64 kilobytes of memory, not current levels. I think we hold multiple, I think we're up to petabytes now in the tax office. But here, when we come to the ethical use of data, now you can have it. We've got over the technological constraint. There are also legal constraints, but also ethical constraints. And fundamentally, the ATO has been entrusted by the Australian community with quite extraordinary and extensive information gathering powers. And to the extent that there, you know, if you are interviewed by the police, you have a right against self-incrimination. In the tax system, you do not. So these are really quite extraordinary powers that are given. And they are given because otherwise it's almost impossible to address the information asymmetry between a citizen and the tax system. But the flip side of these extraordinary powers is that taxpayers must be protected from this information being misused or even potentially used by other parts of government, or let alone made public. And a mark of how seriously this is taken by the Australian community is that a breach of taxpayer secrecy is a criminal offence, and one which is potentially subject to custodial sentences. And can I say, as a tax officer, that does focus the mind on ethical use of data. So we must really reciprocate the trust that the community places in us around their data. This is actually, for those following the press, this is actually currently playing out in the Senate, where there is an order from the Senate for the ATO to release data in relation to JobKeeper for large businesses. Now, JobKeeper data is actually tax data. It is under the Taxation Administration Act. And so this is a challenging scenario for us. Legally, we must respond to such an order to produce, because the Senate powers actually override taxpayer secrecy. However, businesses apply for JobKeeper under a set of rules which provided for taxpayer secrecy. And so we are strongly arguing that unless the Parliament enacts rules or retrospectively requires us to publish the data, or the Senate, after due consideration, compels us to release it under current law, we will continue to argue that it is against the public interest to now take this data public. And that's not just because of the impact on this data set, but also for the precedent it sets in relation to other taxpayer data. Once the principle is broken once, it is easier to break it a second time. But moving to ethics, proper and away from the legal framework, for instance, we have developed a set of data ethics principles which are designed to make interactions easier and to ensure that our data activities support the integrity of Australia's tax and super systems. And we sum those up as act in the public interest, but be mindful of the individual. Uphold privacy, security, and explainability. Explain clearly and be transparent. To exercise human supervision. And I think that's really important, particularly where you are potentially making unfavourable decisions. And to maintain data stewardship. To ensure, even after we share data, that the recipient of that data treats it with the care that we would. So this framework is now being supported by the implementation of a very formalised data steward framework, where we have a designated responsible officer and supporting RACI framework for each and every data set. Of course, we must maintain a robust security framework to ensure the confidentiality and reliability of our digital services. And we continue to adapt and improve our technology to address emerging cyber risks, we are very conscious that we sit on top of one of the most interesting data sets in Australia. The last element I'll just quickly touch on before moving on is an element of our data philosophy, which is to obtain data where it will be used and its usefulness is proportionate to its burden or intrusiveness. So a good example of how this is playing out in practice right now is e-invoicing, which I'll discuss in a bit more detail later, but is really a digital platform for business-to-business invoicing. In many of the countries which are introducing an e-invoicing type platform, all invoices are effectively routed through the Revenue Authority. And this is intended to identify B2B transactions which otherwise would not be reported to revenue authorities. Australia has not gone down this path. Although we've been asked to play a supporting or catalysing role in the implementation of e-invoicing and the encouragement of the networks on both the supply side and the purchaser side, which it requires, Australia has recognised that the vast bulk of businesses operate honestly and accurately report their B2B income to the tax office. And to be blunt, those that don't are unlikely to use e-invoicing. As such, there is only marginal usefulness to the tax system of running e-invoices through the tax office, whereas the intrusiveness or just the sheer amount of data we would be taking from business is disproportionate to that. So moving on to the fourth theme, looking into the future of tax administration, and I might also look a little bit at the recent past. So the exponential growth in the number of digital transactions we process each year is extraordinary. So in SBR, or Standard Business Reporting, we introduced in 2013, it was pretty innovative. And in that year, we processed 140,000 machine-to-machine transactions. In 2020, it cracked 1 billion transactions, machine-to-machine transactions. And we're forecasting that this financial year, that will crack 2 billion. And similarly, our client interaction volumes through ATO Online, this is where people are coming onto our systems. So it's, I suppose, people into our systems. The volumes are over 300% since 2018. And this, I think, compares or outshades the sort of transactions of pretty much any private sector organisation. We've also bolstered our in-house data analytics capability and have some very talented people doing very clever things with ATO-owned data, as well as third-party data. And for, can I say, I'll just do a bit of a plug here. It's a great team. It's called Smarter Data, and we have lots of interesting work where you can do really important things with those data sets. That group sits with me, and that rather than our IT areas, which reflects the increasingly integrated way in which data is driving and shaping our engagement approaches and strategies. We're also working closely with digital service providers to make more of our data accessible to them, or their clients' data accessible to them, so that they can build useful products for businesses. So one other element at a human level is that I think there used to be lots of what I call data Sherpa roles in the tax system. And this was people who picked up information from one place. It might be a spreadsheet, it might be a form, it might be a shoebox, and took it to another. But as the technology, data collection and usage has gotten better and better, we've seen those roles disappear. And in a sense, business models which were shaped around data Sherpering are also under severe pressure. So over the past 5 years, the ATO and the tax profession have been on a journey of digital transformation. We're continuing to develop digital solutions to make it as easy as possible for tax professionals to manage their clients' affairs, but in their own systems to the extent possible, not by having to come onto our systems. And this includes all sorts of real-time analytics and nudges to help them save their clients from making errors. And so this really means that a lot of low-value work is being taken out of the system and gives people the opportunity to do high value work. And indeed, high value work, can I say, ironically, hopefully maximising people's tax by maximising their profits rather than spending a lot of time doing the books on their tax. Another theme where it's really changed, I suppose it's already changed things, but is continuing to change things, is that the more sophisticated use of data is transforming how we measure our own effectiveness, which can then in turn flows into more sophisticated strategies and better operational incentives and metrics. So in the past, Revenue Authority effectiveness was only measured by simplistic metrics such as audit yield ratios. How many audit dollars were earned for a given level of investment? A proxy for tax system health, but actually a really poor one. High audit yield could be a sign of revenue agency effectiveness, but it could also be a sign of a poorly performing system with lots of easy audits. And I would say here, over time, it's really easy to fall into the McNamara fallacy, to measure what is easy to measure, and then over time treat that as the important thing. The analogy I draw here is with WADA at the Olympics doing drug testing. If they catch a lot of drug cheats, that could be because they're doing a great job catching drug cheats, but it could also be that actually they're doing a terrible job and there are lots and lots of drug cheats. And how do you, a metric which encourages simply catching drug takers might actually discourage you from doing things which prevent drug taking in the first place. Maybe also going back to one of Bronwyn's points. So I mentioned before the concept of tax gap, and this is something which has been facilitated through our advanced data analytics. Importantly as well, we publish our findings each year in our annual report so that Australians can have visibility of the health of the Australian taxation system. And as I said earlier, we're running at about 93%, which is world-leading performance. And Jordan mentioned large business, and no doubt there might be a few questions afterwards. But if you read the headlines, you would think that large business tax compliance was in a state of disrepair. We actually think on these metrics that large business tax compliance in Australia is 93% correct at lodgement, or a bit over, 93.5% at lodgement, and over 96% correct after our audit activity. And the gap, the remaining gap, is around $2 billion a year, which, can I say, used to sound big before we had to run JobKeeper at $89 billion. So while no tax system can eliminate tax gaps completely, we're working towards sustainably reducing the tax gaps over time, and we use this program to measure our effectiveness. And rather than not to get into the detail, but given the already high performance of the Australian tax system, so it might be very different, the strategies in other countries with much lower performing tax systems. This means that our strategies are around growing the 90%. They're protecting the existing levels of high compliance, and only after that starting to think about how do we boost through compliance. But even there, with the compliance activities, how do we lock in the future? There's no point doing an audit for this year and then having to start again from scratch next year. Another level that I'm actually quite passionate about, and I think has broad application in large organisations, is around performance measurement. And we often hear organisations complain about silo behaviour. How do I stop silo behaviour? Now, my personal perspective is silo behaviour is usually there for a good reason. And it's probably because you've got silo metrics. The performance metrics for your teams are encouraging that behaviour and actually discourage cross-silo collaboration. So where I think data analytics can really add to performance of organisations is by generating more sophisticated metrics, performance metrics for teams at a team level, where team leaders can understand how their team is performing, not just on their workbench, but in an end-to-end sense. And we call this our Pipelines Metrics Initiative. And already this is making big differences to how our teams are operating and understand what they do. I'd make another observation here, which is that often I hear leaders complain, but I tell them, yeah, they've got metrics, but I tell them they should think across the whole organisation. But to me, it's the obligation of management to give metrics to team leaders so they don't have to double guess their metrics. They know that if they're following their metrics, they're doing about the right thing. Now, the next thing I'll touch on in the future of the tax system, again, is emerging but critical, and one which I think is very interesting to this audience. So in the tax system, we have seen the rise of digital service providers and the digitisation of Australian businesses. This means that the ATO no longer can think of its systems in some sort of tax and super tech island, but rather as part of an ecosystem where our systems interact directly with the natural systems of businesses. You know, as I discussed before, we're expecting about 2 billion transactions directly from people's natural systems in this year. Of course, as a government agency, we must provide good direct services to taxpayers. And recent experiences in the US, in their model, there was an obligation for private companies to provide a free service to disadvantaged taxpayers, which has recently fallen over. So that confirms that we must provide, the ATO must be a provider of residual good direct services. But increasingly, more of the tax ecosystem will involve businesses operating in their natural systems, provided by third parties, with that innovation driven by entrepreneurialism. And we must give those third parties the space to innovate and earn a reward for their innovation. So where is our immediate focus here? It's really at small business. So we know that those who are digitally engaged perform better. They perform better economically, pre-tax, and they also meet more of their tax obligations. So by integrating tax and super into natural business systems, we allow business owners and their advisors to spend more time on growing, improving, and expanding their business, rather than worrying about paperwork and red tape. Can I say, even as a tax collector, let alone as a fellow Australian, it is absolutely in our interest because we collect more tax from profitable businesses than we do from unprofitable businesses. So we're currently at the early stages of exploring with businesses and DSPs whether more of the tax system, particularly relating to small business, can be distributed to help businesses comply and avoid getting into difficulties with the ATO. So some of the questions we are asking ourselves and other participants, DSPs in particular, are if we're confident that the data is in the natural systems of a business, do we actually need to ask for it in the form of a tax return or activity statement? Could we rely on a simple data feed? Do we even need to hold the data at all? If we are confident that the tax obligations which are arising from that data are being met. Again, how can we better help businesses avoid mistakes before lodgement? Can we provide the natural systems access to some of our risk filters? Can this further reduce our need to hold data underpinning that analysis? And of course, ultimately, there must be, you know, as I said, it's complex, buggy code. We must preserve and ensure high quality oversight from tax professionals in that more distributed digital distributed digital tax ecosystem. But again, how can we make sure that when we're asking for data, it's data we really need and it's really useful, and instead try to rely on the honesty of our the businesses and rely on their natural systems. So the other end of the spectrum, and Jordan touched on this, the nature and complexity of large businesses and the bespoke nature of their systems. In fact, it's hard to say that for many large businesses, they don't even really have one natural system. They might have many natural systems. Means that we're still quite some way off from getting to this level of data integration in real time, driving risk analysis or compliance approaches. So instead, we continue to drive more sophisticated analysis of bespoke data sets, but still pushing some of our risk engines and risk thresholds to those businesses to help them shape their own behaviour rather than driving to audit. Of course, many other fancy tech innovations, we're looking a lot at automation. Indeed, I think our chatbot had about 1.5 million conversations in tax time last year and resolved 94% of them. We're looking at automation of some of our information gathering, even in the context of audits, and really trying to free up our people for work which requires people. So that's human judgment, particularly where we're making unfavourable decisions, but also empathetic support. And how do we help people who are struggling? And like this last year and a half has really brought that home. So really embracing technology, one of the benefits is that we can save our people to do the things that only people can do. Now, the last thing before I wrap up, and thank you all for your attention and staying on, I was talking a little bit about the whole of government approach. So increasingly, the government is looking at a whole of government approach to the provision of services and support to the Australian community. The Prime Minister is on record as saying execution is very important, and Minister Robert is a very enthusiastic advocate for making services to the community better. So this whole of government approach requires a whole of government approach to digitisation and data. So the ATO, as a large and advanced agency, is a key participant in this initiative. And a few of the building blocks that we are working on are e-invoicing, modernising business registers, and MyGovID and RAM. And I'll touch on each of those, but they're all critical. We see them all as critical parts of Australia's digital infrastructure, which will make it easier, cheaper and safer to operate in Australia. So e-invoicing, as I said, is a platform for business-to-business invoices, and it will make it much cheaper and less human intensive for businesses to send, receive and process invoices, as well as reduce payment lags. It's being based on the PEPOL framework, which provides extra functionality for future phases, potentially. And indeed, we're working closely with New Zealand. So it will be an Australasian initiative with the hope for, because we're using the PEPOL framework, hopefully even further international expansion. As I said, the ATO is in this process as a catalyst and someone who can encourage network effects. We are not using this as a way of obtaining data for the tax office. Modernising business registers is really putting the key business-related registers, as the name would suggest, in one place, in one agency. And this, of course, makes those registers more robust, but it makes them easier for citizens to interact with because they're all in one place and you only have to tell the government once. In addition, by having a natural touch point with government at the start of a business's life, it'll make it easier to help businesses go digital from the outset and interact digitally with government, as well as being a simple entry point to the range of government interactions in particular for the less sophisticated businesses. Sometimes that's called, a single government inbox, but it's much more than that. And Minister Robert is a very enthusiastic advocate of that. Now, MyGovID and RAM are a resilient framework for proving your identity and then also for authorising others to deal on your behalf. Now, this has primarily been so far in a business context, but increasingly is coming across to the individual context. Already it's used by more than 30 agencies and is ultimately a single set of keys for dealing with government. For those on the call, I would strongly suggest getting your MyGovID and linking it to your MyGov. And indeed using it to link to your ATO app. It's a very, it's a high, as I said, it's a very resilient and high quality ID framework, much stronger than the preceding. And indeed, for those of you who are particularly advanced, we have just launched a public beta on linking the MyGov ID to what we call an IP3 level based on biometrics, where it will link your image, and your ID credential to your passport photos. So to really ensure that it's you and not somebody just pretending to be you. On the data side, we're playing a leading role in data sharing across government with the Data Availability and Transparency Bill framework. Now, really importantly, this is about sharing unit level data for the purposes of service, not for compliance. And so from our perspective, will require very strong data stewardship. But from a whole of government perspective and from a citizen perspective, the government should really only collect data once and then work out how government needs it, rather than asking citizens to work out which part, or to provide basically the same information multiple times across government, and even know who they have to give it to. And really you want that to be with the most natural part of government for that organisation. A classic example of this is STP. So STP is of great use, for example, for Services Australia around welfare benefits. Rather than asking employers to provide the same data or similar data both to us and to Services Australia, we collect the data and then we share a subset of that with Services Australia, the subset that they need. Also at a higher level, in terms of impact on government, ATO data is increasingly being seen as a whole of government asset, critical for understanding what is going on in the economy and informing policy development. And of course, we see the vast bulk of the financial transactions in Australia. An example of this is in the height of the pandemic, the ABS realised that its survey data around employment was not fit for purpose. It's hard to fill surveys accurately when you're a little bit preoccupied, and is indeed a burden on businesses which were very preoccupied. So instead, we provided them with single touch payroll data. So they got, can I say, completely accurate data on 92% of the working population in real time, much more accurate and much more useful than the classic survey data. And really within government, there's in this DAT framework, it's really seems to be developing that a couple of agencies will be repositories or sort of hubs for data, ABS being more on the financial side, a separate health type hub of data, and that data will be made available appropriately for policy development and even research. So look, wrapping up, I think I've covered a lot of territory, but thank you for your attention and inviting me to share the insights that we have at the ATO from our experience over the last few years and into the future as to how data and digitisation can improve the tax system, but can improve the Australian society. So when you lodge your next tax return, whether yourself or through your agent, I hope you have a better insight as to what we are thinking about behind the scenes as we continue to strive for a system where tax just happens and Australia remains having the world's leading digitised revenue authority. Thank you. And Jordan, I think we've got some time for Q&A.
Yep. Thank you very much, Jeremy. There's so much to see inside what we sort of all take for granted behind those three little letters. I'm referring to ATO, not tax, but I guess they're three little letters also. So very, very interesting stuff. We have a number of questions. I just want to start with one of my own. We've had the whole pandemic, right? It's really raised our whole awareness of things like the resilience of our supply chains and of our systems, the importance of our own domestic capability to actually exercise and create solutions within our economy. And we know that as a nation, we've done some great things that you've told us about with the ATO. So I'm curious, what do you see as the way you've talked about extending the digital transformation across the economy from the government level, but how might we use this capability, the success of the ATO, I forget the number now, but I think it was over 800 APIs that the ATO currently has active. Did I get that number right?
I think about 300, a bit over 300.
So there's massive interactivity of government and private sector. How can we use all of that as a leader in digital transformation of government services at the very least to position us for export and leadership in Asia and elsewhere?
Yeah, no, thank you, Jordan. That's an excellent question. And look, I think so the tax office and maybe just a few other things. So our budget each year is about $3.5 billion. Of that now, significantly over a third last year was spent on ICT broadly. So we are spending a lot of money on ICT. Now, some of that is maybe more, blasé sustainment, but a lot of it is improving our systems. And so can I say, I think we see ourselves as sort of really part of sustaining the career paths of a lot of people in the Australian ICT community. I think our approach to the tax system, which is to leave space for digital service providers and indeed to really be supportive, and try to, some of our strategic initiatives are about it, as I said, distributing part of the tax system to third parties, hopefully creates again this sort of group reward for innovation. So we hope to encourage that. There are some things which we've realised over the last couple of years must be done in Australia. So data sovereignty is very important across government. And we had the somewhat unfortunate experience that one of our data centres was purchased by an overseas company, a company controlled in an overseas country that we didn't really want to have our data. And so now we are very focused on both our data centre and also our cloud activities having data sovereignty, so being in Australia and not owned by unhelpful countries, potentially unhelpful countries. So look, I think from our perspective, we see ourselves as being in a position to foster a lot of innovation. At a broader level, I think this is consistent with where the government is seeing things where there are some things which are pieces of infrastructure which should be built once and well, but other things should be sort of more open. So, Jordan, that's probably a long way of not quite answering your question, but I think we do take our role as developing, being a career path, or at least part of a career in both ICT but also data analytics. I have about 900 data analysts working to me. I'd like more.
All right. Well,
I can't have them all.
No. So let me move quickly to a few questions from the audience, and with just a few minutes that we've got left. So one of the questions here from Keith is, in such a data-rich environment, what sort of role and scale do you see for audit in the future?
Yeah, so audit's part of our business, and it is, as I sometimes say, the dog can't just bark, occasionally it's got to bite. And in a sense, it is an obligation to those who do just pay their tax willingly, that we do hold others to account. Now, I think audit will increasingly be skewed towards large business because it's a harder, in a sense, the data is more bespoke, it's harder to get. We do, can I say, if I did a poll of people on this call, they would probably very dramatically overestimate the number of audits we do. But increased, I'd say already probably 90% or more of the audit, in a sense, audits we do or changes to tax returns we do are actually now pre-lodgement data nudges rather than sort of after the event, you've lodged a return, we think you've made a mistake. So there will be fewer audits, but they will be, I suppose, deeper and reserved for those who need them. For the vast bulk of Australians, their audit, in a sense, their ATO experience will be, if they get things wrong, a little message while they're filing their return saying, are you really sure?
Okay. So now one more question. This is actually from the Grant Petty, who was the recipient of the award we gave this evening last year. And he asks a more complex question, perhaps. So you talked a lot about the use of metrics and data, but metrics in managing behaviour. And he says, do you worry that metrics and data can be a little bit inhuman? That with such a focus on metrics and by seeing citizens as data sources and what they do as the metrics that you're measuring, do you worry that you could lose track of the effects on behaviour that tax law has and the distraction that the compliance might create that will lessen the creativity in business? So if everyone becomes a compliance engine and not a creative part of the contributing to our success.
Yeah, so it's a good question. I might just maybe comment on two elements of that. One is our hope is actually to get out of the way and mean that there is less time by entrepreneurs spent thinking about tax. So that is actually our goal. The tax just happens in the natural systems. And so hopefully that unlocks, rather than suppressing entrepreneurial activity, unleashes entrepreneurial activity. That's our goal. Around, of course, we do not view Australians as sort of sums of data, but we fundamentally a tax system which is more data driven can free up the people to be more empathetic. When somebody's in trouble, for them to be able to call us and for us to be able to tailor a payment plan or give them a deferral rather than have the machine. In terms of my comments on metrics, it was actually, in some ways, what we're trying to do on our internal metrics is to help our teams who want to be doing the best thing end to end for their clients, but are constrained at the moment by simplistic metrics. So by having a more sophisticated metric suite, which better matches to the outcomes we want end to end, we're actually hoping that our staff experience will be better because they will feel empowered to do the right thing, not feel like they have to rush something because of a metric.
Yeah, I think that you and I were discussing earlier today that the essential motive of most public services in Australia, but certainly of the tax office, is to help people, not to punish people. Punishment is the very bottom of the priorities that you have.
Yes, I often say internally, our business is not to collect penalties or interest.
So I think we have time just for one last question. And I'm going to pick a question from our MC, Elaine, who's just said, look, there are some amazing systems that you've described today, and obviously they're working very, very well. We would not have an economy in the situation we have if we didn't have these government systems to implement them. But does it ever get frustrating in leading this organisation when the politicians don't quite use it the way it could be used?
I sometimes say in the Senate, like one of the joys of my role is going to the Senate and testifying every now and then. And one of my favourite lines when I don't want to answer a question like this is I say, I am only the bricklayer, not the architect. And so as an administrator, my role is to really do what government wants me to do. Look, I think there are many opportunities for us to improve the tax system over time, to move the tax system so it more naturally follows the data rather than the other way around. It makes it easier for citizens because it also then becomes easier to explain and understand. But the political process is a fraught one. And I would say from my experience with politicians is that they are trying very hard. but they have constraints, and I have great respect for the challenges that they have in trying to get through change. It's a very hard job that they have, and that's a non-political comment on all sides. It's a hard job they have. Look, I think there is an element where we just have to gradually, when we find opportunities to improve a bit, we improve it. But to your comment right at the start, Jordan, wouldn't it be good to just rip it all down and start again? Like that's not.
It's not
sometimes we all dream that, but maybe we should be careful what we wish for too. Now, Jordan, before we go, can I just say one special call out?
Please.
That Bronwyn had her mother on the call, I think. But I'd also like a call out to Emeritus Professor Jenny Edwards, who is my godmother and has been a long-term mentor. And can I say, if I was nervous through the call, it's because my godmother was listening.
Well, I'm sure that, like the rest of us, she was very impressed with your talk and with everything that you had to share about what's going on that has made our ATO the most digitised revenue agency in the world. So thank you very much for being so generous with your time and with your expertise. And we're sure we're going to get a lot more people watching the recording of this as well.
Thank you.
With that, I'd like to hand back to our chair, Wayne Fitzsimmons, to formally close the proceedings. Wayne, it's over to you.
Thanks, Jordan. And thanks to you and our Pearcey colleagues here in Victoria for just a wonderful program this evening. Jeremy, I'm very impressed. I've made a few notes here with some of your stats and that. And as a major contributor to the tax office, I'm very delighted, actually. I did live in the US for a number of years, and I found the adversarial approach of the IRS pretty daunting. And so I think this is an enlightened approach to tax, and I'm very impressed and very proud that investment in technology is paying off, and the 93% numbers there of conformance is unbelievable. It's one of the wonderful highlights of our year is the Pearcey Oration, and your stimulating presentation tonight is a great contribution to our country, but to the Digital Innovation Festival, and really lifted the level of discussion in our country to this is vital part of our future. I'd also like to thank the Victorian government team led by Kathy Coultis and Kelly Hutchinson for staging this festival. Particular thanks to Minister Pearson, who joined us earlier on to present the award, and to our winner, Bronwyn LaGrosse. As I mentioned earlier, this is our 6th year of involvement in the Digital Innovation Festival, and we love being part of it. Kicking off the festival last week, we had a terrific Pearcey Institute roundtable on the future of work, led by our chair, Dennis Tebbett. And for those of you who missed it, it's up on our website now. Next Tuesday, the 7th of September, in partnership with ScienceWorks and Museums Victoria, the high school student hackathon will be held online as part of the Digital Innovation Festival, with support from industry professionals, including the Foundation's Peter Thorne and ScienceWorks staff. High school students will have the opportunity to create their own AI-based solution to the question, how might we use artificial intelligence and machine learning to make our communities a safer place? We're trying to bring industry, academia, and the community together. Our big celebration event, marking 70 years since the very first computer conference held at the University of Sydney back in '51, Riding the Digital Wave Summit, will now be held on Thursday, the February 24th, 22 in Sydney, for obvious reasons. With generous support from University of Sydney, University of New South Wales, ANU School of Computing, New South Wales Government, CSIRO Data 61, we will explore past, present, and future themes around human-computer interaction, the impact of automation on jobs and industry, and how Australia can ride the digital wave to ensure our future resilience. And Jeremy's teams set a very high bar to make this a real outcome that we can all anticipate. The speaker lineup in February is fantastic, and I'm sure hopeful that I can get to Sydney to be in the audience. And Jeremy, as you live in Sydney, maybe you can join us. In the interim, to mark the 70th anniversary, Peter Thorne, Barbara Ainsworth and David Abramson, Barbara's at Monash, David's at University of Queensland, amongst others, are creating some exciting digital initiatives with Australian EdTech pioneer IC, that's capital ISEE, and with the ABC science show's Carl Smith. We'll be sure to share the details with you very soon, as that is a Saturday lunchtime, I think, broadcast from ScienceWorks, Science Show. And October the 12th, we will again present a special edition of the Pearcey Conversation to make Ada Lovelace Day and celebrate the impact and achievements of Australian women in computing. This will not be a gender-balanced show. This will be all women. I offer my congratulations once again to the 2021 Victorian Entrepreneur of the Year, Bronwyn LeGrice. So well deserved, Bronwyn. I wish you every success in your endeavours and all the very best for our National Awards competition in November. And I'll make sure that you're coerced onto the Victorian Committee as well. The award season, as you've all witnessed today, is now in full swing. There's still time to nominate an entrepreneur for 2021 who has taken a risk, made a difference and been an inspiration in the ACT, New South Wales and Tasmania, but they're closing very quickly. There will be state award presentations mainly online across Australia over the coming months. Early October in Queensland, I know for sure. I'd normally be there as being a former Queenslander, but I can't make it this year, and I think they won't let me back in. With the national awards happening, hopefully in person in Tasmania on November the 13th, Friday, November the 13th. The question is, who will Tasmania allow in? Anyway, we're hoping that the Tasmanian government will come to the party. For all the events I've mentioned, for the details of our initiatives, please go to our Pearcey website. So on behalf of all the members of the Pearcey community and on behalf of all of you who've joined us this afternoon, thank you to our events team at Slattery's and to everyone who's contributed to making all of our events and activities possible and successful. A big thanks to Victorian Chair Jordan Green and to Victorian Deputy Chair Elaine Saunders for your impressive facilitation of this afternoon's proceedings. My sincere thanks to you all for your attendance and support of the Foundation. With that, we'll conclude the official proceeding. Please enjoy the rest of your evening and I hope to see you again soon. Thank you very much.